Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. Today let's go back to the old world and paint a few Beastmen heroes. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and we'll cover the basics and paint the models to a battle ready quality. In the second half we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with gray primer. If you can't get this primer, any smooth, medium gray primer should work fine. I like to attach models to corks for easier handling, and in order to attach models with slotted bases, I need to cut a channel in the corks. Then I just attach it with super glue and leave it to dry. I want to apply a Zenithal kind of prime on these models, and for that I like to use standard white acrylic paint, diluted with water and sprayed with my airbrush. I like to spray lightly from all sides and then heavier from the top. The end result is gray on the underside of the model, blending up to white on the top. Some painters like to start with black primer, but I preferred this method instead. I want the models to have a grayish peach kind of skin tone, and I made a mix of 1 part Cadian flesh and 2 parts Nuln Oil. You could paint a second layer if you want a darker result. I decided to paint 3 kinds of fur. I painted the first with Garaghak sewer. When working with contrast paints, I like to paint one section at a time. Use plenty of paint so it flows into all the recesses, and then use the brush to soak up any excess. The fur has a lot of texture, so I like to use a stippling kind of brush stroke to make sure the paint gets into all the crevices. I painted the next one with Gore-Grunta fur. Then I painted the third with Basilicanum gray. I'd like to paint a couple different shades of leather on the models. First I mixed a dark purple with about 3 parts Sigvald Burgundy and 1 part black Templar. It looks a little vibrant right now, but it will get toned down later. I painted the remaining leather with a dark red. This is the same mix I used for my Tyranids, about 3 parts Flesh Terror's red and 1 part black Templar. I want the banner to be a brighter red color, so I painted that with a layer of Flesh Terror's red. Next I painted the wood with Skeleton Horde. These models are going to be pretty dark, and I think a lighter color like this will help complement the color scheme. I painted some Garaghak sewer on the banner fur next. And then I painted the severed elf head with a mix of equal parts contrast medium and dark oath flesh. I painted the elf's hair with Bonewhite, and then painted it with a layer of Nazdreg yellow. Next I shaded everything so far with Nuln Oil. I'm not worried if this gets on any of the unpainted areas, since I'll be using opaque paints for those sections. Use plenty of shade so it flows into all the recesses, but keep an eye out for excessive pooling and use the brush to soak up any excess paint. I painted the chainmail and axe blades next with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a bright, even finish. Next I shaded the steel with a mix I call Armor Wash, and you can see how to mix your own bottle in this video here. This is a mix of equal parts Ratling Grime, Contrast Medium, and Lamian Medium. My old mix was equal parts Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade, but I found myself having to apply 2 layers because it wasn't quite dark enough. This mix has a similar warm black tone, and it's strong enough that I usually only have to apply 1 layer. I want to do something a little different on the armor plates. Most of the time we see them painted with silver or maybe brass, but I'd like to have a light, almost white armor to complement all the dark colors on the models. I base coated the armor with Offwhite, and after the first layer dried, I painted another for a bright, opaque finish. While I had Offwhite on the brush, I also painted the horns. Next I shaded the armor and horns with a mix of equal parts Skeleton Horde and Contrast Medium. I'd like to have a blended effect on the horns, and have a darker color on the end. Contrast paint is really easy to blend. You just have to work quickly and blend it before it dries. Working on one small area at a time, I painted some Basilicanum gray on the end, rinsed the brush, wiped it off on a paper towel, and then used the clean brush to blend the edge of the wet paint. If you want the ends even darker, you could paint a second layer after the first one dries. Next I painted the horns with a thin layer of Agrax Earthshade, almost like a glaze. This will add some warmth and help unify the blend. I decided to add some rust to the steel and bone-colored armor with Mournfang Brown, diluted with a few parts water. With very little paint on the brush, I painted a few random spots on the chainmail, the axe blades, and I added some paint in the cracks and around the rivets on the bone armor. Since this has a lot of water mixed in it, it'll dry unevenly and leave tide marks if you apply too much paint at once. So it's really important to have very little paint on the brush and build up a couple layers. Next I added some chips on the edges of the bone armor with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale. And you can learn how to mix your own set in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin Gray is a close match. I painted the remaining leather straps with black paint, and I also painted a narrow black line around the armor details and anywhere else that needs extra definition. I painted the armor details next with Runelord Brass, leaving a narrow black outline. After the first layer dried, I painted a second. Then I shaded the brass with Agrax Earthshade. At this stage you could base the models and call them finished. But I'd like to add some highlights and extra details, so let's keep going. I highlighted the skin first with glazes of Rakarth flesh, followed by an edge highlight with less diluted paint. Depending on how dark your base coat and shade layers dried, Rakarth flesh might look too bright. If you need to darken it, I would suggest adding a small amount of a dark brown, like Rhinox hide or Blood Reaver flesh. I highlighted all the fur next, starting with the dark brown fur. I used a sharp brush and picked out some of the fur strands with XV88 brown. You could dry brush this step if you want to save time, but since I'm only painting a couple models, I'm okay with spending the extra time. I also painted a few lines along the hooves. Then I highlighted the lines on the hooves with Xandri dust. I highlighted the orange-brown fur next with rat skin flesh, and again I spent a little more time and painted the hair clumps individually with a sharp brush. I also painted a few lines on the hooves. Then I highlighted the hooves with a very sharp line of Bonewhite. Next I highlighted the gray fur and hooves with Administratum Gray. I highlighted the base of the horns with a sharp line of Bonewhite. I'm not going to worry about highlighting the top of the horns, but if you wanted to highlight them, I would use something like Storm Vermin fur. I also used Bonewhite to pick out the teeth, leaving a dark outline around each tooth. The Nuln Oil shade I used back in the beginning of the video seemed to make things dark enough for me, but you could add some diluted black paint first if you need a darker base coat in the mouth. Let's move on to the leather next. I highlighted the edges of the dark red leather with corn red. On some of the flat areas I diluted the paint slightly and applied it like a glaze, but mostly I highlighted just the edges. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. I'd like these areas to look like dyed leather and have a worn look. So rather than using a bright red or orange, I highlighted the edges with Tuskgore fur. This makes a more muted red that I think looks more natural. Besides, I doubt beastmen have access to the same bright pigments that the Bretonnians use. Moving on to the dark purple leather next, I highlighted with a glaze of 2 parts Phoenician purple and 1 part Tuskgore fur. I really like what Tuskgore fur brings to the mix. Just like with the red highlights, I think it makes a more natural, worn kind of look. I highlighted the edges of the purple leather next with Tuskgore fur. Next I highlighted the black leather with a mix of equal parts black and storm vermin fur, and I painted just about everything except for the deepest recesses. I want this to be more like a dark gray leather rather than black. Then I highlighted the edges with storm vermin fur. Let's work on the banner now. First I want to darken the top area with some glazes of black paint. Since this is a really bright red, I like to think they stole it from an enemy. It's seen lots of battle, dried blood, and dirt, and some darker glazes will help tell that story. Next I added a big chaos star to the banner. I'm using gray number 8 from my custom grayscale, but you could use Corax white or any other light gray instead. Dilute the paint with water and have very little paint on the brush. This is essentially a very precise glaze. Start by outlining the shape with a thin layer of paint, and once you're happy with the design, add some more opaque paint and build up a few layers. I would recommend you start with a sketch on a piece of paper. That way you have a clear idea of what to paint, and you can work out some of the potential problems first. I also added a few runes and symbols on the banner here and there. The designs are looking opaque and bright, and now I need to weather them so they match the rest of the banner. I used an old brush with Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil, and added some streaks of grime. I think the older the brush, the better. Stipple and tap the brush, and make some random looking marks. Build up a few layers wherever you want it darker. Next I painted all the stitches with black. And then I painted them with Storm Vermin fur, leaving a narrow black outline. Next I painted all the studs and rivets on the leather with black paint. And then I painted them with Iron Hand steel, leaving a narrow black outline. Next I added some scratches on the blades and the chainmail with Stormhost silver and a very sharp brush. I think it's easy to overdo this kind of thing, and I think it's better to add these effects sparingly. You can always add more if you want to. I also added a couple scratches on the bone armor, on top of the gray marks from earlier. I highlighted the edges of the brass next with a mix of equal parts Stormhost silver and Runelord brass. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Canoptic alloy instead. I painted the eyes next with a very bright orange, leaving a narrow black outline. I'd like to add some blood splatters to these models. There are some different blood effect paints on the market, but I usually go with some kind of red ink mixed with gloss varnish. I mixed about equal parts Flesh Terror's red contrast paint and gloss varnish. Any kind of gloss varnish should work well. This is a cheap craft varnish, and I've been pretty happy with it. I like to use an old, beat-up brush for this kind of thing. I think it makes the marks look more random. I added some streaks on the blades and stippled it on the banner trophies. You could build up a couple layers if you want more depth. Next I added a small amount of black Templar to the mix and darkened a few spots of the blood. These slotted bases have gaps on the side, and I use an old brush, wood glue, and a small piece of paper to cover them up. Then I applied a generous amount of wood glue to the top of the base, and then sprinkled on coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with thinned black paint, followed by a dry brush of Xandri dust. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, and then shaded with a mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. I painted the edge of the base black, and after that dried, I added patches of static grass with superglue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. After painting these models, I think I'm fighting the urge to collect a Beastmen army. I really like the way the bone armor and dark reds complement each other, and I think it would look good on the tabletop. Have you ever painted a couple test models and then decided to go all in on that army? Should I buy a Beastmen army and paint it up for the channel? Or is there another old world army you'd rather see first? Drop a comment below and start the conversation. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting.